Right, everyone, welcome to today's roundtable on research in a box. If you're wondering what research in a box is, the today's panelists will educate you. I'd like to start off by mentioning that this event is going to be recorded. So if you're not comfortable being recorded, please feel free to drop. But the idea of the recording is so that it is available for people to listen to later on. And we will be putting up the recording on the CRA website. Um, let's start with the next slide. I'm going to talk about. So this event is being hosted under the auspices of the Computing Research Association. And as a very brief introduction for people who may not know what the Computing Research Association is, it's a nonprofit that seeks to unite industry, academia, and government to advance computing research. It's primarily a North American based organization, and it consists of a number of programmatic committees. And you see a number of them here that you may recognize: the CCC, the Computing Community Consortium, SERP, the computing that evaluates the research pipeline, CRA education, and CRA widening participation. We are on behalf here of CRA Industry, which is the newest programmatic committee of CRA, about 4 years old. And I'm the co-chair of CRA Industry along with Fatma Ozjan, who's not here from Google. Can you move to the next slide, Helen? So CRA Industry, its mission is to convene industry partners on computing research topics. And as you will appreciate, talking about research in a box is sort of very relevant to this mission, and connect these partners with constituents. Could be other industry partners, could be academia, government, right? This is part of the three-legged stool that CRA sits on. And the goal is to provide mutual benefits to all and improve societal outcomes. So CRA industry itself consists of companies of all sizes, right? Ranging from large companies. Jamie here is from Microsoft, a large company, as well as startups. Companies which belong to traditional computing research, as well as those that are non-traditional, could be in healthcare, could be fintech, and we have in CRA industry a CRA industry council, at this point about 15 members representing the cross section of industry. Um, and we convene members in a variety of ways to share perspectives. We interview stakeholders, we have roundtables like this one, sometimes followed up with day and a half long workshops. We produce white papers and reports, all of which are accessible from the CRA industry website. So with that brief introduction to CRA industry, let me mention the Research in a Box working group. So this is a working group that we started a few months ago. And you'll see a number of people here who are the working group members, some of whom are on today's panel. Andrea Gibbs, who will be the moderator, is there. I think Theo Drain is part of the panel as well. But in addition, we have a number of people, Hector Gonzalez, Hank Korth, Vivek Sarkar, myself, and Helen, who are all part of the working group. And so with that, let me introduce today's moderator. So Andrea Gibbs will be moderating today's online event. She's a lawyer turned technology executive. I believe she's the current CEO and founder of Gibbs Corporation, a semiconductor technology consulting firm. Prior to that, she spent 25 years at Intel, where she had senior executive roles in just about every part of the company, and has received multiple Intel Achievement Awards over that time. Andrea wanted to make sure that we all say something fun about each other. So let me mention that on the fun side, Andrea is fluent in more languages than anybody else I know. She mentioned that she's fluent in Spanish, English, Catalan, French, Italian, Portuguese, and by now probably Hebrew as well. She's completed a number of, I think, 5 marathons. Andrea, is that right? And a number of half marathons. Um, and with all these things, you shouldn't be surprised to learn that she's an eternal optimist. So with that, Andrea, please take it away and introduce the other panelists.
Oh, what, look at that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Divesh. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be the moderator in this panel. We have a powerhouse today. We have three PhDs that have done a collective amount of research over 200 or so years among the four of them, among the three of them, plus I worked in research as well at Intel. And so today we are going to discuss a really relevant topic. So I was doing some digging just to set up the stage for us about the computing research dollar investments worldwide uh, between industry, government, academia, and there isn't, to my knowledge, any one number reliable that can represent the totality of the investment. Believe it or not, I couldn't find it. If you guys can find it, feel free to share. I'd like to hear. But I did a Google AI. I use the AI engine to tell me more about these research investments, and I have the numbers here. So it's something on the realm of, just by the industry alone, let's say the computing industry, the private industry, the R&D investment, research and development in 2023 was $200 billion. And I think that number is really shy, to be honest. I think that is probably an understatement. And the projections is that the dollars invested between governments and the industry worldwide, leading by the United States, China, the EU, Japan, and Korea, is in the trillions of dollars. The reason I mentioned not so much to focus on the actual details of the numbers, but it's the size. We're talking, we don't even know exactly how much money. We just know it's a ton of money. So the goal today is really to offer you, how could you either start or continue a research program, whatever you are. You can be in academia, in industry, in the government. What are the key ingredients for that research program? What are the lessons that we learn painfully throughout our careers from the work that we have done, so you guys can avoid it? What are the key, let's say, BKMs, best known methods and learnings to make this program successful? So it's a fun discussion. We will be starting with few questions to the panel. I will introduce them. And at the end, we're going to have time for your questions. So I invite you all to sit back and relax, grab your favorite drink, and focus, stay present with us. The quality of the discussion is as good as the quality of your questions. And so we are so delighted to have this amazing panel. I have to read the bios because they are really impressive, and I just have to read them because to give honor to them. We're going to start with in alphabetical order with Theo Drain. Theo, you can just say hi to people. Theo, he's a
Hi.
fellow silicon design engineer at AMD and has grown and cultivated industrial and academic like links from first working at the numerical hardware startup Arithmetica after a University of Cambridge mathematics degree to founding the numerical hardware group within Imagination Technologies GPU, Graphic Processing Unit, division while studying for an electrical engineering PhD at Imperial College London. At Intel's Compute and Graphics Division and now at AMD, he creates applied research groups that promote an acadustrial, that's a cool term, acadustrial PhD model, simultaneously full-time industrial employment and PhD enrollment, driving knowledge creation and transfer directly into production. Welcome, Theo.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Jamie Tivan. Jamie is the Chief Scientist and Technical Fellow at Microsoft, where she's responsible for driving research-backed innovation in the company's core products. Jamie is world-renowned for her research into productivity and personalized research and was recognized by Time magazine as one of the top 100 people to play an instrumental role in AI development and societal advancement. She led the creation of M365 Copilot, love Copilot by the way, by integrating AI into Microsoft products, invented the first personalized search algorithm used by Bing, and coordinated the company's hybrid work research during the pandemic. Previously, she was technical advisor to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, and Jamie is also an ACM fellow and a member of the ZIC-IR and CHI academies. She holds a PhD in AI from MIT, a bachelor's in science from Yale, and is an affiliate professor at the University of Washington. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks, Andrea. It's a pleasure.
Last but not least, we have Claire Vishik, a dear friend, also former Intel. She's focusing on a portfolio of startups and is also an independent consultant with projects in the United States, Europe, and Asia. In the past, Claire was an Intel Fellow and Group's Chief Technology Officer, and prior to joining Intel, she held leadership positions in Schlumberger Laboratory for Computer Science and AT&T Labs. Claire worked in several areas, such as artificial intelligence, from rule-based systems from the 1990s to LLMs and SLMs. She also has some experience in hardware and network security, trusted computing, privacy, enhancing technologies, and cryptography. She published on related global policy and trade research collaboration issues and was appointed to numerous advisory boards and boards of directors for technical organizations and government agencies such as Trusted Computing Group, TCG, Trusted in Digital Life, TDL, ENISA, European, FCC, CSRIC 8th, CyBac, or UK Royal Society cybersecurity efforts. She led or co-led many initiatives, for example, the NSTAC report on software assurance, IEEE blockchain, TC, NIST CPS Public Working Group, and the CyberLeap Year Summit. And Claire received her PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
So with that, you guys, we have an opportunity here to walk through some of these topics we just mentioned before. So first I would say, we debated quite a bit in the panel and with the organizers about, there are a lot of activities going on today in the media, in the news about policy, regulations, government. Today, our focus is not going to be that. We might discuss it another time, but our focus today really is about the nitty-gritty of how do we do this research? How can we empower you with what we call in a box set of tools that you can potentially use in your own research initiatives, wherever you are? So to start, we believe one of the first things we need to ask is, what are the key ingredients for a successful research program? This is a question to any one of you. If anyone can get started.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. You're essentially asking like, what's in the box, right? And this is a conversation that we've all had like together and with folks on the CRA industry working group, but like, what is it that companies need to bring research to their organization? And one of the things that's interesting is we all face similar challenges within our organization. And so I think I think it's a great question for us to brainstorm a little bit about. There's different organizational models that companies use for research. If you think of sort of the historical computing research labs like Bell Labs or PARC, and even MSR to a certain degree, there's sort of this notion of like having a research lab where research takes place. And then that leads to a lot of questions about like, how do you transfer knowledge from the research lab into the organization? And so you need to think about what are the mechanisms for doing that. More recently, particularly with AI, a lot of research is happening directly in product, given how much computing technology is shaping what people are building. And they're often the pieces that we need, or what does it mean to incorporate research directly into our product building? So I think these mechanisms around how does research have impact in an organization are one important part, and that can be structural or otherwise. One thing that I know we've all dealt with a lot is actually research talent is different than a lot of the talent that companies traditionally hire. Companies are good at hiring developers and designers, product managers, scientists. You hire differently, you evaluate differently. They need different resources to be successful. Conference attendance is a great example. Like being able to connect with the community is really important for scientists. So that means like if you're hiring scientists, you need to think about your budget differently. Talent also comes from the academic community. A lot of companies have very good motions to hire undergraduate students, but thinking about how you hire people with PhDs, that looks even just like the process, like the interviews are different. People come and give a job talk, and that's different. Those are the way you build relationships. I know at Microsoft, for example, traditionally with undergraduate interns, like the idea is sort of an undergraduate internship is like an extended job interview. You come to an internship and there's sort of this expectation of like, then you can figure out whether you're going to, the pipeline with graduate students is a much longer pipeline. You sort of, PhD students don't know that they're finishing next year necessarily. Like you're sort of at the like 2 years till I finish for a really long time. And actually a lot of that, and actually hiring postdocs or visiting researchers when people are on sabbatical look very different. Or even funding research that happens within a university. And all of those are really challenging as well, because you actually have to start thinking through IP issues. And that is different. Publication is another really important area. How do you think about how you publish externally in a way, that both helps with your recruiting, it helps drive leadership. It actually makes me think another piece that's really important. If you think a little bit of it's like, how do you build research into your product? How do you, whether that's mechanisms for transfer, and then we were talking something about talent, and how do you think about talent, both your full-time talent and the talent you engage with academia? I think maybe there's a whole bucket also around like success metrics, and how do you measure the success of researchers? How do you measure the success of research and product? And then even actually one of the things that we see right now a lot with customers is how do you help customers measure the success? It's very hard to figure out when the science underlying a product is an important part of that product. How do you understand how do you help people making purchase decisions understand that and reason over that? So those are some that come to mind, but I'm sure Theo and Claire have some thoughts about other things that I was missing.
So yeah, I think the kind of the models that I've seen, I kind of were hinted at in Andrea's introduction, was one of the first models I ever saw was a startup that I first joined, where the small company, half of it was professional professors in mathematics. And so we were literally, the idea of research and production being separate, I kind of never saw it. And so ever since, the idea that applied research is something that drives directly into production is something that was kind of pretty standard and normal. And that led, as in the introduction, was this kind of idea of what I think CRA calls dual appointments of students. And this really is an idea which helps stitch some of these things together and raises everything that Jamie was describing, where the student would be conducting full-time PhD research at the same time as working in a production environment. So this is a person who's not based in an industrial lab, they're based directly in production. And the really interesting aspect of that is that the technology transfer is continuous and weekly. Clearly, it has a lot of setup complexity from an IP perspective. But it was been really interesting to see the rise of applied research. But at the same time, it's amazing to see in production teams the absolute need for applying old research. We often talk about pre-competitive research as something which we just want to not engage in complex IP, but project into the future. What's amazing when you dive into production teams, of course, is the question, what research should they be already using? And I get this question all the time where, when some of the collaborations we've had with academics, they could very quickly be horrified. Like, what do you mean you're not using this, that, or the other already? So this whole idea of applied research is such an amazing space. And it's wonderful to see that kind of increasing, like in kind of the applied research groups that Jamie drives, and basically that shrinkage between research and production. I think the other thing that was wonderful, kind of going back to the research talent type of thing, this dual appointment strategy is slightly interesting because it mitigates some of the challenges of finding great PhD students and then trying to hire them. That's clearly a very competitive space. Whereas this kind of dual appointment, you can start building relationships with undergraduates, and then essentially these dual appointments allow key talent. And it really is a kind of boutique recruitment process. Which students would you find to then fund their kind of research and have this dual appointment structure? And that really helps mitigate some of the recruitment challenges. The other great thing about dual appointments is it really helps encourage other things, such as other collaborations between the university and the company. It's a conduit for many, many other things. So yes, there's tons of really interesting footfall questions, essentially, about how do we help bridge gaps, either between different parts of the business as well as academia. The other interesting thing about this kind of dual appointments is we've actually been able to build relationships both with academia and the industrial lab, as well as the production. So there's obviously three entities at work and bridging gaps between those. So anyway, that's the area I have most experience in, and I would highly advocate, but there are lots of other models, of course.
And you call that, thank you, Theo. Sorry, I just want to say a couple of things. You call that, what do you call it?
So one of our wonderful students called it an acadustrial PhD, because the phrase industrial PhD has certain connotations. You know, there's one type of industrial PhD is it's funded but very hands-off. So acadustrial is what one of our students coined. The other one, I think Helen coined this as a dual appointment for students. I know that CRA has published something recently on dual appointments of academics holding a position both in academia and in industry.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're gonna give it to Claire in a minute. I wanted to add a couple of comments to your points of Theo, the bringing in PhDs to do research. One other component of this is when you have academics, a student that is in the PhD phase coming to the industry, let's say, to do research. Often, when I was managing a research program in cybersecurity, I found that the academics welcome some level of practical guidance of how that research is actually, like you said, applied and beneficial to the product roadmap, to solving a customer problem. The question of what problem are we solving is really important in industry, right? Because theoretical research is also really valuable, but for the industry, you got to be able to solve a problem. And so I found it really interesting that for some of the PhD students, that was the focus of the, let's say, the mentorship from the industrial side is how do you apply that? How is that useful? That was really interesting, interesting dialogue. Claire, hand it over to you. Muting.
Unmuting.
This is a very good transition, Andrea, for what I was going to say. The predominant model of operations in industrial research for large companies today is somewhat applied research that feeds into the products in the most effective way possible eventually. I was fortunate to have experienced many other models, all in industry, just in different companies. And I can say that all of them are quite efficient if the topic at hand yields itself easily to what has been done. I certainly have experienced very early in my career, first as an intern, some curiosity-based research. That was Schlumberger Laboratory for Computer Science. A lot of discoveries, as you know, things that come to mind are Teflon or microwaves have been made accidentally. Not because there was a whole project associated with them. More recently, two-dimensional materials that are of interest to computing came out in the same way. So that model works if the company can afford it, and it does yield a lot of useful, sometimes not directly relevant information. In that case, one of the side patents that the lab has created actually paid for the lab, even though it was not connected to the most of the topics that the lab was pursuing, which was artificial intelligence, such as it was in mid-1990s. I also experienced the traditional models that were discussed here. I am familiar with the models that are associated with consortia. Those models work very well when it's a complex, for example, platform that requires a lot of participants with different skills, and you need to achieve this interaction and a lot of busy work in a finite amount of time without knowing if the final result will be useful, but you know more or less that it will work. So consortia such as the Horizon Consortia in Europe work in this fashion. All the deliverables are predefined for 3 or 5 years. It's exactly known, how the consortium will progress from the inception until the delivery and sometimes translation to practice of the platform. I also am familiar with sort of research oriented model where a university or an industry research group comes up with something completely innovative, and they know that it is potentially commercializable, but it's not in the ballpark of the company's immediate direction. So they are spun off, they are still supported sometimes, and they continue their research until it results in a product. Some companies that existed for a long time, for instance, Intrinsic ID started out in that way. Research from Philips was initiated on physically unclonable functions, and then it became a set of products that are now used in some context. It's almost 15 years later, so there is a significant time span. I also have experienced the research model in smaller companies with about 5,000 employees, where research is mostly a service to make the results of the development and maybe applied research visible, because that is what the company benefits from the most. So all these models, again, work fairly well when they are aligned with the goal, and when the personnel, the IP rules, the funding, are all aligned with those ultimate goals. I think that even for large companies, we now need to be more open-minded because of how everything started working today, where the direction has been outlined, but sometimes the results are misaligned with the expectations, but still very good. So I think we should welcome all the models that have been developed with or without external funding, and adapt them the best we can.
Exactly. You hit into something really valuable, Claire. I mean, you all did, but one in particular that will help us transition into continuing the conversation. And I wanted to remind folks, you have access to it, to the Q&A, right? We have a Q&A. My friend Helen here, the one who put together this whole program for us, Helen is reminding me, you can post your questions in the Q&A. I am looking for those questions of yours, guys. We will get answers to those questions at the end. Remember, so if you have the questions, note them in the Q&A. I'll be looking for those as we go along. Okay, so Claire, you said there are various models. You all talk about different models. Jamie talked about some of the internal, Microsoft, product development, focus. Theo talked about ACA industry. I gotta memorize that term. Acadustrial, right? Acadustrial models. Claire talked about startups, different ways of doing the research with the consortia, etc. And one of the key ingredients to take from this dialogue of many is the model is a model. So the model will work so long that it meets the goals of the business, the institution, whether it's an academia, a university, academia, an industry, a startup, large, small. It all goes with what's your goal? Are you clear on your goal? What is the vision for that, the product or what you're doing with this research? And are they in alignment? And you can pick and choose the model. The models have different ways of working, different intellectual property rights exposure or protection, or different ways how you could go about it. So one of the key takeaways is make sure that you know what you understand and are clear about the goals, and then map the goals to the models, the available models. And there's also some models that are hybrid. You can pick and choose from different models to fit your goals. Okay, I mean, you guys agree with this, or I'm venturing out
I
here?
think there was one thing that I loved Claire saying. She used the word accidental. And I think this is one of the
Yeah.
most amazing tensions that could exist. So I fully appreciate goal alignment, absolutely. But I'd be interested to learn more about how accidental discovery fits into a goal orientated, aligned, budgeted collaboration. So I'm just going to throw it out there because I really value these tensions. Because obviously, from what I've seen, there needs to be some excitable, fertile ground if there are researchers or academic type folks involved. Where is the fertility of the ideas balanced with goals, outcomes, timelines? That's one of the most interesting challenges because some of the folks we're talking about is their value alignments as well as goal alignments.
Although when you think about an organization, like it's partly the responsibility of a research leader to like a goal can be serendipitous discovery or, like, and so it is very much the success metrics that you track and work towards matter a lot. And if what you want to work towards is, and Claire, you sort of mentioned creativity driven research or, new unexpected insights, it becomes your responsibility to think about how you set your research portfolio and the environment up to achieve that. Whereas if your goal is, short-term OKR improvements, you want to set and like I actually think one of the most interesting thing is that neither researchers nor companies are one thing for all time. So like also being able to be flexible and dynamically move across those boundaries and transition is really important. And I think that's something like when you think about some of the older models of computing research where you sort of have a separate research lab, that flexibility is a little bit hard
Yeah.
and it's to your point, Theo, too, to some degree about like the figuring out what the right models in the right context and being able to be flexible across those and manage the portfolio.
Excellent point. I want to add something that I think is important. These accidental discoveries or even research results sometimes are negative, and this is good as well. One example that comes to mind, we received funding, Intel and 6 other organizations from the European Commission to develop physically unclonable functions in silicon. Up to that point, the area was very active, but it only used FPGA simulations for physically unclonable functions. Once we created the actual devices and could test them, the results were significantly different from the results in simulations. That pretty much upended the field, but it was good. There were, outsized expectations associated back in the day, that was 15 years ago, with physically unclonable functions. We proved that they are useful, but in a very limited way. That saved a lot of effort, a lot of funding, a lot of research programs that would go nowhere. And very frequently, in my experience, there were the results that were negative, that told us, no, don't go there. This is not the right way.
Yeah. We heard also the stories of Bell and many scientists that they don't call it failing. They did all this research and 10,000 times they didn't get the results they wanted. But in those 10,000 times they perfected, they keep, continuing and learning from those experiences to get to the desired outcome. So you have this, unexpected inventions. I remember also at Intel there was a time where an engineering team came with an invention. We were working on creating the systems on chips. So chips and a motherboard and the different chips in a motherboard were separate. And that wasn't like 2000 and I don't know, 2 or 3. And they started to create these systems on chips. And in the process of creating the system on a chip, they found a way to diffuse energy. Not intentionally looking for that, but they found a way in the way how they configure the system on chip to create this energy diffusing technology that is pretty cool. So this sort of accidental discovery, tangential discoveries are pretty interesting as well. Okay, guys, so Let's see. We talked about models. We didn't really dive into collaborations in so much because that's one model. I just want to say that, in my role, in my field, as I'm a lawyer and I'm also a technologist, I see a lot of interdisciplinary research. And we didn't talk about it specifically as we were preparing, but I think it's worth mentioning that, maybe traditionally when I started my career, there were computer engineering, computer science, semiconductor, anthropology, law, and now you have Stanford Codex is AI and law, lawyers and engineers, AI engineers sitting down at the same table. It's fantastic. I watch them talking and they actually understand each other. It's phenomenal. And I find it so refreshing. And so I want to see if any of you have anything to say about this interdisciplinary research as one of those, we can call it model of
Well, I
research.
think interdisciplinary research is really important, and actually interrole research as well. So it's how to, you can think about different fields of computing, or you can think of different types of research. We have ethnographers and anthropologists, for example, who work with our computer scientists and cognitive scientists. And all of those matter a lot. But then you also think about, what does it mean to work across engineering and research as well. They're very different approaches, and you see a lot of, actually, it's one of the things that I talk about that's kind of hard. I think it's probably something that all of us do with industrial research. I feel like I'm always bridging all the time. Like I'm bridging research disciplines, I'm bridging across, product and research. It's quite tiring because you're always having to translate. It's part of the reason I like this concept of like research in a box, or how do you provide some of the tools to support these bridging, make it easier to bridge. Like it's very hard to talk to business leaders about the value of publication and what are standard practices, because you sort of have to inform from the bottoms up somebody who has no concept, whereas us in the academic community have a lot of concept and understanding about publication and where the risks lay there and where the opportunities do. And so like having sort of shared practices that as a community we recommend for organizations makes that bridging a lot easier. And then companies can go and start thinking about how they want to adapt it. It actually also, another advantage of that is it reduces the risk for research leaders. When you look historically, there have been, when if something gets published that causes harm, is that, what could the research leaders who advocated for that are at risk. When data is released because you want to create challenges or data sets for the research community, that there's a lot of risk. When you have structure, when you collaborate with an academic and they go off and say something bad about the company, what does that mean? Or they go take the idea and productize it and form a competitor. Like all of those things are challenging and like real parts of research and being involved in a broad community. And so like it's one of the things that I find exciting in particular about this research in a box conversation, is thinking about what are those things where we can sort of help create standards that we can then lean into and say, okay, this is the standard, this is the recommended practice, and we may adjust it for our organization. But it helps balance that.
So I think sorry.
No, go
I
ahead,
think
Theo. This is awesome. Keep going. No.
so the experience I had essentially was translation between disciplines. Some of the work I've been mostly involved in is translating mathematics into hardware design. And that's incredibly fertile. I mean, by definition, if we're trying to do collaborations between, say, academia and industry, having a boundary that is fertile is vital. And those often occur on boundaries between disciplines. And we've found incredible things. Just translating known concepts in field X to field Y. It's also profoundly compelling from a recruitment perspective, as well as fertile ground for invention and various technology innovations. And it can also open the floodgates. One of my favorite things I heard in mathematics discipline in particular, the moments when mathematicians realized that field X is really just field Y in disguise, they can translate all the theorems across immediately. And then they'll discover, oh yes, we know that one, they're just identical. But there were these things that they had that they didn't, and they had that they didn't. You immediately cross those boundaries. So, and a lot of that is really cool. Obviously, that's by definition associative reasoning. You're linking different fields, and then you get this translation. And it's incredibly compelling. And I think that also helps set up certain research projects to be fertile from the ground up. And I think one of the things that I ended up trying to help phrase was calling it transdisciplinary research, because there are these moments when you're literally translating, exactly as Jamie said, like being a translator. And the other, just in general, science communication. The great thing about collaborations is we need to be able to tell the results of the research into the universities, into the companies, to the conferences, to the patent lawyers. There's such an amazing audiences for when these collaborations work well.
Okay, anything else on this topic?
Yeah, actually, I just, you sort of inspired me a little bit too, listening to your answer. Another thing that's interesting with interdisciplinary research, one of the things that's challenging is research takes time. And and we know that, and that's good. That's a reason it's hard to measure in short term, and and it's often hard for companies to make a commitment to a new research area for a long time. So like when we're talking about interdisciplinary, it's like hard to be like, oh, this is, there's a rapid shift to remote work. Maybe having somebody who understands geography would be useful and help us, or, like there's, and yet like, as we've said, building the relationships, hiring, onboarding a geographer would be a lot of work, and then bringing them and integrating them and having their research actually we'd be like 4 years down the line before there's any value there. And it's one of the reasons, actually, I think academic collaborations are so interesting here too. Like bringing in graduate student researchers to work with you, hiring postdocs, working with faculty is a good way to sort of get that, like bring in a temporary infusion of expertise in an area and a discipline that you might not know. You also likely don't have the expertise to like successfully hire an amazing geographer, because like you just don't know that. And so like being able to explore new areas is like, I think, a real opportunity in terms of academic and industrial collaboration.
I found that internships are just a classic way. It's just a wonderful thing. I've met so many amazing researchers, and it's nice to have the conversations, and it will be nice to engage somehow. And we found that, yes, having an intern cross that divide, this temporary short-term thing, let's go try something, is a great vehicle. And of course, at the end of it, it could be, no, that didn't work. But if it does work, you literally have a person who's had a foot in both places. So that's normally, it's wonderful. If you can find ways just to actually keep the smorgasbord of options of engagement with, key collaborators, and keeping that balance. I think we'll move on to the really tough research agreement stuff at some point, but finding ways to maintain external relationships or relationships across divisions that are still healthy with different methods and vehicles. It's nice to keep in your back pocket a range of what those engagement levels look like. You want a full spectrum, because sometimes the really big investments may not play out. Is there some interim? And that's always a balance.
Excellent point. I think we are all enriched in industry from all the forms of collaboration with academia, even when it is junior interns or very qualified postdocs. They bring new ideas, they bring new directions. However, it's also important to remember that while the strategic objectives for both industrial and academic research are the same, to acquire new useful knowledge, to move the technology space forward, those goals are very different. They need different things than we do in industry in order to be successful in academia. New ideas that are clearly not usable, at least in the foreseeable term. The example that comes to mind is an electromagnetic key storage for the cryptographic key, a metal box that is pretty large where you put the key. That was a very exciting but extremely theoretical work put forward by Carnegie Mellon at the time, that everyone admired because it was unusual, but everyone knew it will not be utilized for anything. It was just an interesting idea. Another area that comes to mind where there are differences, and I will give the example of standards, is to have a theoretical framework that is not implementable in practice. An example that comes to mind is it's brought forth from a recent discussion I had on the subject. Federated identity. Federated identity was a good idea. Everyone thinks that it would be nice to consolidate identity storage, mitigate risks in a centralized fashion. But who is going to be the identity provider? Who is going to take those risks? This has never been considered. And that's why federated identity never happened in real life. What did happen is what OS0 does now, an authentication mechanism that provides access across the board in a different way, technologically, practically in a very similar way, recognizing the nuggets of wonderful things in high-level theoretical ideas to translate them into something that could be practically implemented, that does the same thing in a different way. I think this is one of the very, very important areas that industrial research has to approach.
One thing I've seen, I don't just for sheer, it's not comedy, it's actually very interesting. I had a vocabulary problem way back when. I actually caused offense in a business meeting by saying something was interesting, because the response I got back was, I needed it yesterday. So it was really interesting, that crunch point where some of these different value systems can emerge, and it can be in simple passing interactions.
Mm-hmm. I'm choosing to ask you guys some of the questions that the people are asking live, because they are really right here in the nitty-gritty what you're talking about. One of the questions come from, by the way, folks, I'm selecting to choose to answer live some of your questions. Some of them are answered by the team offline. Let's see. So Hank is asking, is saying, culture is influenced by the degree that research community success counts relative to tech transfer. What are your comments on this? It has also to do with funding. So funding from the top creates a very different culture in the lab as contrasted with funding via fundraising from the development organizations. So so the culture of the success of the research community and how their work counts vis-a-vis the transfer of technology. What are the considerations you guys see there?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting point here, because this is one of the transitions that I've certainly seen at Microsoft over the past decade is, we've always had a very strong, to your point, Hank, sort of centrally funded. Oh, and the question it's now moved into the answer. I was like looking at it because it was useful to be able to to see it for reference, but we always had a very strong centrally top-down funded research lab in MSR. And one of the big transitions we've had is increasingly research exists directly. And sometimes to this point, you would see some of that research would be funded by product. And there's certainly, I know IBM has had very interesting models about how do you fund and transition research across boundaries, and have product teams pick up some funding and move it. One of the things that's really happening right now is research is not even transfer. And this is true, I think, in a lot of startups, particularly tech startups, where the research is part of how part of the product. And in many ways, you cannot ship an AI product right now without research embedded. It is how do you create those feedback loops, evaluate, figure out new ways to incorporate that data into the model and use it. And in that way, it's not really separate. I think there's a little bit of a challenge around time horizons, which was showing up in another question that I saw too, maybe even related to Joe Fish's question, but something around the time horizon. So this is something Satya says a lot. He's H1 and H3 are the same thing right now. And I think that's kind of an interesting like it's an interesting thing. And I actually, one of the things that I encourage the research leaders talking about, you know, who do research within product is to, in many ways, the question right now with research isn't the time horizon. It's not like, oh, I want to ship this in 3 years versus right now. It's all in the, you know, it's all happening right now. It's like the level of ambiguity and the amount of risk that you're taking on and the likelihood that it's going to fail. And so then that connects directly into the metrics, as we were talking about, and how do you measure and how are you measuring and rewarding that failure, you know, understanding that that failure is going to happen and not making it okay, failure is going to happen. How do we learn from that? I mean, like, you know, honestly, almost every research paper we ever write incorporates some sort of failure. It's not like we sit out and do research and know what we're going to do, but we still publish papers along the way. It's the same thing and in fact, the more we fail, the more interesting that research paper is going to be. Like when the findings are really different than our initial hypotheses, that is because there is something new happening there, and like that is true as well. So I think that's why I think it comes often down to the metrics and how you're measuring, which is where we even started this whole conversation, being able to understand how do you measure research beyond like patents and publications and start figuring out like how many hypotheses tested, what did you learn, what failures were you able to avoid.
Yeah, that's the question from Samuel. Hey, Samuel.
Oh,
Hi,
good.
Samuel.
I pulled in everybody's question a
Yes,
little bit.
that's exactly right. That's perfect.
Yeah,
That's Samuel's
yeah.
question. He's in the PhD track, you know, and was an intern at Intel, I believe. And then his question is, okay, so how do we measure long-term impact by the research from academics in the industry? To Jamie's point of lessons learned, mistakes, or things that you learn in the process, I will also say, you know, if your research was implemented in a product, even if it's a tiny feature, that's measurable, right? The how is the important part, I think, in my experience, managing engineering teams, is having the accountability, Samuel, the identification of this was contributed by X or Y intern, PhD, academia, researcher, right? Was contributed and giving the acknowledgement to the contributor, you know, into that particular discovery and that implementation in a product. That's huge, right? If you look at that long-term impact, that's going to be in Microsoft products for the next, you know, 10 years, and that's going to become another product in 20 years. That's really important. Publications are also important. Moving the needle in the industry is important. If you are contributing to a conversation at the industry level and you add an idea, a new way of thinking about something, you know, it might not be patentable or protected because there's information out there in the public, but that is driving the industry in a new direction. That's another way of measuring impact. So I'm sure there are other comments from you guys, Claire, Theo, about measuring impact by the academics.
I think there are sort of two directions in industrial research today. One is that Jamie outlined so well, continuous improvement, where things happen now and they are a little better tomorrow and maybe completely different the day after tomorrow. This mostly applies to areas like artificial intelligence, areas like software, and this is a completely new model. It depends a lot of infrastructure that we have created around research, including things like standards, for example, versus open source. But then there still are areas that are extremely important with this significant lens time horizon. Here I'm talking about things like quantum computing, things like quantum materials, superconductivity at higher temperatures, things that will affect computing in a significant way, but that are at the beginning of their path, and that will require a lot of work over maybe decades to get to commercial solutions. So I think finding the balance between both those models is very important for companies. Now, how to deal with credit assigned with regard to acquisitions. There are different acquisition patterns in companies. Sometimes novel skills are acquired for the personnel to internally continue the path that is long term. In other situations, the acquisition is to acquire a product and incorporate it. Those, again, are two completely different models that need to be balanced in order to understand how we behave with regard to IP, assigning credit, looking into the future, and so on.
I just wanted to add something about the funding thing that came up earlier. I've seen something very interesting recently between, say, an industrial lab funding various projects at universities and then a product division funding universities directly. And what's been particularly amusing is to watch some of those conversations play out. One of them I've seen could be the industrial lab asks/demands to know what the business unit is directly funding and why. There's a very interesting balance emerging here where is it something that the industrial lab should have control over or not? And that balance is really interestingly shifting. It should be a collaboration, but I've seen the rise of direct academic project funding from a business unit to get what it needs done. And at that moment, the industrial lab, then I've seen examples of they're essentially trying to scramble because they're then saying, what value do they bring to the products? Because clearly something isn't aligned. And so, yeah, I'm seeing definitely a shift in this space. And there can be split funding. There's all manner of interesting funding models. And ultimately, it heads exactly to where Jamie pointed out that, it's just funding of research by the organization, full stop. But that is definitely shifting and evolving as we speak.
Yes. And there was one more question about, let me give the credit to credit is due. So, Jawfish, how do you get executive support? I think, Jamie, you hit on it briefly, how you experience it at Microsoft. I will also say, working with execs, right? Executives have very short focus span, most of them, and they have a specific problems. Like you hear Satya or former Intel CEO Pat will say, can't sleep at night because I need to address X, Y, Z. So as researchers, if you are from the university side, right, if you are engaged with, let's say, Microsoft actively in their work, name the university, pay attention. Pay attention to what Jamie says is the main problem, in academia. This is a big issue. And take the initiative to go figure it out. Can you figure out a way to solve that problem? So ultimately, execs decide based on the actual problems they have, the actual, products and problems they have in their companies. And so making your pitch or, relevant, it might not necessarily be a solution tomorrow, but if it's relevant, you can paint the picture that it will assist in addressing it. It will support, making an innovation that will support the company's direction potentially also. So making it appealing to them, speaking their language is going to be important. Jamie or somebody.
I just have something that I was so impressed by, a wonderful talk I saw by Byron Cook as a formal methods person going into AWS. And he spent a year, I think, with the sales folks. And when he eventually started to contribute research ideas into execution, he leaned increasingly into the documented Amazon value system. The value system in Amazon is how will it benefit our customers? And if his ideas that hopefully would indeed add value to customers, if he got gated or wasn't making progress, he would literally sit down some of the product managers and say, is this truly a problem for your customers? Yes or no? And just lean into the customer value add. And he had to fully lean into that as a way of breaking deadlocks.
Well,
and I think that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's such a good question. And I like these, but like another thing that actually every company is terrified of right now that I think is really like the strongest argument for research right now is disruption. And we're under a ton of disruption. And actually one of the things that's useful and so we're, sometimes we think about and the pull you get is from customers and solving their problems right now. Like product teams want to understand how to solve their problems right now, but the technology is changing and the world is changing so fast right now that there's sort of disruption coming down all of them. And the more that you, I mean, and like even Claire, you were talking about quantum, like when you think about the real disruption that quantum is going to bring, being able to like structure and think through what that's going to look like, and actually like, you know, Andrea, you were talking about what keeps people awake at night. Like you make the research that's happening like that, what that is solving, you know, like they should be kept away. Every company is worried, no matter how big or strong or small you are, is like that something is going to come around that they don't see and disrupt them. So anyway, just sorry, wanted to.
True.
And I think that
Yeah.
answers the other question, by the way, the question of how do you measure impact? Production teams, I know, are always spawning, strategic projects of different shapes and sizes, and they measure them in certain ways. So you just align how the production teams measure things in general, and then the research has to fit into that. And yes, asking the question, what keeps you up at night? And just alleviating product pain in execution should be a primary focus of generating research ideas. And that's one of the other great things about mixing, the academic and industrial divide. A good friend of mine just called it industrially inspired research. You do not want to be theorizing what is execution suffering on at the moment or will be in 5 years. You need to spend time listening. It's the standard charity argument. You don't just believe what people need. You spend the time with them. So yeah, this is footfall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up this topic, I want to pose a question to see it from the side of academia, because I know some of you work in academia. Claire, you work in academia. You were a professor before, if I remember correctly. Theo, you were also engaged with Cambridge and so on.
I
So the
also worked in academia before.
yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the academia angle. Like, imagine you are professor hat, right? So from the academia, that we have several folks online that are from academia, MIT. We have people from Berkeley, different places, Cambridge. So from the academia side, can you give us, okay, what's the perspective from the academia vis-a-vis the investment in the research, working with the industry, the metrics? Just to kind of complete the angle, because I think we talked a lot about industry, startups, and um,
Um, well, I should say that from the academia's point of view, working with industry is twofold. From one point of view, which is purely pragmatic, is the ability to place their students. It's the ability to get additional funding for large projects. But from the second point of view, which I think is more important to many academic groups, it is the ability to understand what directions of research are actually needed, what directions of research are productive for industry, which of them can generate response, and which ones can potentially be translated to practice. It's a sort of the ability to cross-pollinate the research ideas with the practical needs of uh, industry, but at a high enough level of abstraction so that the connection can happen better. So um, I think for academia, collaboration with industry is important in several ways. The most important of them is to cross-pollinate their basic research.
mm-hmm. Well said. Anybody else? I know, Jamie, you also are in academia. I just look at your resume. You also you're a professor at Washington, right? University of Washington. You all
I
have
am,
experience.
but it's as an affiliate appointment. So I don't think I represent that other than like through the work in the CRA board where we talk a lot, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, you guys. So now we are going to move on to the next point. This was fantastic. So we're going to talk about doubling down on those key ingredients. Let's discuss some of the main, let's say, opportunities and challenges. For example, I will start. Theo, you're going to be the first one to go, and the rest will add to the comments. So one of the key elements in research is really figuring out the intellectual property rights. People call it IP rights, intellectual property rights models. And how do you address and handle intellectual property rights? So do you want to start talking about this
Yes,
topic?
I do want to discuss risk and challenges. Before I get onto IP, I'd like to discuss one other thing that typically goes, it's an observability bias problem, is when no agreement finally appears. So I've been involved in this on quite a few occasions where collective, whether it is different parts of the same business or with an academic group, we'd like to do a collaboration, and then eventually nothing comes of it because the agreements were never, they didn't converge on negotiation and other things of this type. And it's nice to highlight that, personally, I've seen relationships broken because of this. So I do want to just highlight that, some of these heavy duty research agreements, they have to be very carefully managed as to when you go down that path. Because ultimately, if they don't pay off or they're not created, relationships can be damaged. And I personally suffered from this. And I think, Andrea, I think you mentioned this in the past, where who do you align when such that you can move on to the next step? So I just want to highlight that as a real risk or concern. So as an example of what isn't enough, although technology alignment between, say, an academic and industrialist is vital to move forward, its energy alone is clearly not enough. And if those two sets of people engage quite frequently and often, and they're all wonderfully excited, if a deeper research agreement or collaboration doesn't happen, those relationships can be damaged. So I do want to warn people that you have to walk in a fine path. There's a certain amount of dating that has to be done, but not too much before the marriage begins. And I think Andrea has lots of ideas about what are the set of people that have to meet prior. And that also links in with I've seen it too often, of course, just diving in. We know IP is crucial, but people just jump into the research agreement angles so quickly without sorting out the goals prior and things of this type. So you don't have the right people at the right time doing the right stakeholder management, essentially. So I want to just raise that as a key challenge. But yes, diving then into IP, one of the things that clearly has to happen, obviously, this is most prolific in academic industrial research agreements. Obviously, it's institution specific. It's specific to the business unit and the academic groups. One of the key items is, does the IP model, is it static or dynamic? I think is the thing. And I've seen some really interesting examples of this. How much static IP agreement has to be done? So this is upfront, what goes into the research agreement. And basically, it has to be established so that the people on the ground can execute. This isn't just simply a question of slicing and dicing IP rights of who owns what. But, it can be typical. You see agreements where you might say, if a particular piece of IP emerges as of interest to both parties, then we halt the research and we work out who wants it or if it's joint or this kind of stuff. But if the actual work is going so fast and is so wonderful, that's not executable on the ground. You can't be pausing and halting it. So depending on the nature of the research and the expected ferocity, shall we say, of execution, you would need a static IP model. On the other hand, I have seen situations where if the negotiations, of course, become protracted, which they easily can do, then there is wisdom in saying, let's just park it. If we enter a moment where something happens from an IP side, then we should reconvene. So that's kind of a trigger point. And I think it's about establishing the agreement is there to service the execution of the research. It shouldn't be a fight over what is mine per se. So that really is a collaboration between the IP lawyers on both sides and those who will execute the agreement.
Yes. Now, bet to differ a tiny bit, Theo. Bet to
Okay.
differ. So, former lawyer here, right? So, I would say, through that intellectual property rights and a discussion up front is really important. Whether you have a 20-page research and agreement, which I discourage it, by the way, to anybody, whatever you are into Microsoft, it's not really 20 pages is crazy. Simple keeps it fresh and understandable. So having like you said, talk about marriage, right? Having an understanding among the two parties about the goals. Back to the main premise: models go to goals, and then you gotta go to specific objectives, and you gotta define those before you even throw it at each other a paper with 20 pages of terms, because it's like glazing over things, and particularly for engineers and researchers, like, I don't even know what this is. So it's important to have clarity on this. If you are aligned or not aligned, it's good to know really early in the process. It really early doesn't have to be in 1-2 days, but early, so you can see whether or not there is an alignment both with the goals of the academic institution and the enterprise, and then if there isn't an alignment, there might be an opportunity to rephrase the research or shift it a bit so that it aligns. There are different choices that you can make, but before the launching of the whole agreement, there gotta be an understanding. I used to have, when I used to support Intel Labs, the Intel separate research organization, it was a 1 page, gives, gets, key gives and gets of both sides, really 1 page to be aligned or not. And it was a really interesting discussion when you put the two teams together to see the viewpoints. And sometimes we were way off, sometimes we were really aligned. That is an important lead work before you even dive into the models, the IP models. IP models is just a big aspect of an agreement, a contractual arrangement with another entity. It's important to know it, but it's not the only one. Funding also is very relevant. Depending on how much money one gets or gives, there are expectations. Talent is very relevant. If academia has the only expert on quantum mathematics, guess what? They're gonna go, well, this is our guy or girl, and therefore, they have a leverage on how they want their work to be, how treated, and so on. So it all depends. So there are many factors to consider.
I thought your analogy there, Andrea, was useful around marriage, because part of what's lovely about marriage is it is a contract that we all exist in, that is standard, that everybody knows. And actually, which brings us to a research in a box. Like, it's actually like, I think in some ways what we need are, what are the standard mechanisms that we can use that we can then try to align to, because that might then help avoid some of the challenges that Theo was talking about as well. Like, so, I was sort of talking about how, yes, it can protect an organization or research leaders. It can also protect the individual parties engaging in that. Like, when you engage in a marriage contract, you know what you get, you know what you don't get. It's relatively structured. And if you want it to be bespoke, you can go off and modify it. But that is useful. And so, actually, a lot of what we do in engaging with academia from a Microsoft perspective is actually to go into models where there are known processes, and having a few additional kind of models like that might be useful, like the full-time employee model. That is a known model. That's why it's lovely to work with graduate students. We can hire them as full-time employees. Bringing in a postdoc as a way to engage. When we engage by giving money to an academic who remains at the institution, we tend to use a model that's very much an unrestricted gift model. And so there we're like, yeah, the IP is not useful, not something that we have, we have the right to use it, but we're not restricting other people from using it. And that's very useful for us then for some of this blue sky, creativity driven research, where we're like, gosh, it's really important that this problem gets looked at. So I think it's very useful. And I think the CRA is really well positioned to think about what are those good, useful models that we want to create. And I think we can't have too many. Companies can certainly go and create their own bespoke ones, but useful for us to have some of these standard things to apply to avoid all of the challenges that we've been talking about.
Yeah, over the years, excellent points, both Theo and Jamie and Andrea. Over the time, I think there was some level of liberalization of the IP views by industry, at the same time as there was some loss of liberalization on the side of universities as they created more extensive licensing offices and became more interested in capturing IP. 30 years ago, when I was starting my career as an intern, it was not possible to create a collaboration agreement with the university based on gift. It just was extremely rare. Now this is quite common. At the same time, agreements such as, again, because Europe has its own model of integrated projects where 30, 40 entities could participate at the same time. Negotiation about background, foreground IP takes a long time, but over the lifetime of an integrated project, it actually has very limited value because very little is done by way of patents, typically in conjunction with this very extensive consortium research. So I think ideally it would be probably important to become, as Andrea suggested, less strict about incremental patents, create more flexible models associated with this that will enhance collaboration without preventing the participants from using the patents. What we are trying to protect, in fact, is the breakthrough patents, the ones that define a new area, the ones that will make or break the future of a company. CEO was very correct when he said that industry research has to make the creation and deployment of products less difficult. But this is what keeps the company going. What makes the company really grow is engaging in breakthrough technology areas, changing direction. Microsoft is a great example of that. If we looked at Microsoft 20 years ago and now, it would be a company that's entirely different. And that was the key mechanism for Microsoft's growth. So I think a discussion is probably needed between the academia participants, government participants, industry participants about where we really need to protect IP, where we need to be more flexible, where we need to be extremely strict. I think this could be defined without too much difficulty.
I think one thing I would like to do, and I've seen it, there's been raised for some of the CRA white papers, is not only to have like an example of what the IP models could look like, but also include some of the what we think ideally, like this audience and the panelists would see as a productive move forward. So include existing IP models, as well as if we do have any recommendations that would make things better or easier, or even where we would like the industry and academia to go, to include that in our models. I think that'd be very interesting. I think Joe Fish mentioned something about even childcare and research agreements. There was like a societal element to these research agreements that go beyond the standard means. Anyway, I'm just throwing it out there. I think hopefully that's one of the key outcomes for research in a box.
Yes, and I wanted to add from the CRA perspective, Devesh, you're still on, right? I believe one of the key considerations at the moment is whether the CRA can provide, like a tool on a box sort of paper that might have some written guidelines. Devesh, you want to comment on this, whether this is something we're going to take on? I remember we discussed it briefly, but I can't remember whether that was something that it was decided.
Well, that's part of the plan. I mean, we have a research in a box working group, and one of the artifacts that we intend to produce, right, is a white paper, right, and which will identify, if you will, right. I have this mental image of a box, and of course, a box consists of manila folders, right? And each Manila folder will talk about the different models that work for specific topics, whether it happens to be IP and so on, right? We'll discuss that. But that's very much part of the output of this working group.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
Andrea.
Yes, of course. So it will come, and I believe one of my proposals is that we actually have a focus section on intellectual property rights, collaboration agreements, research agreements, like in detail. Like just dig in into the, let's say, flavors A, B, C, D, and dig in and ask questions. You guys will be hands-on. This is might be my advocacy with the Devesh. We'll figure it out. Stay tuned. But for the purpose of this conversation, I think, if we can, kind of continue to elaborate on the points of special risks and challenges with this research to ensure success. We talked briefly about intellectual property right models, having the match model to objectives and goals. There's also an important piece you all mentioned about transfer, research and transfer. So there's actually a practical challenge. You guys tell me if you disagree, but I saw a practical challenge in my career, both on the legal side, watching it as an advisor to different business units, and then as a leader in engineering, managing my teams and getting extremely frustrated over sometimes when I had agreements and invested money and I couldn't see through the actual deliverables coming from these collaborations in research. And I took responsibility. I took my team and I took responsibility, like, we got to fix this. And so one of the things that I learned in my experience was, if you have a collaboration or let's say an engagement with the academia, right? And you have a model, let's say, where you say, okay, for the sake of argument, you say, well, any inventions, in my case, it was in semiconductors and BIOS, basic input output software, BIOS, low level software. Any inventions that happens on modularity of the BIOS, that was my team, by academia and academics and my team, then that particular invention, if it's patentable or there's a patent coming from it, it will go to a pool on Intel. If the invention was, I can remember the academia was focusing more on like the register, a higher level registry, and taxonomy of how you structure this kind of code. And so if the invention was in that area that academia it was very interested, that was something that the rights were assigned to academia solely, and then we get a license, say, to use in our operations. That was all very beautiful in paper. But what happened was the academics and the engineers started to work together. They love it. They love to innovate. I call them the Tinkerbells, or they love to just be inventing things and free and so on, and very exciting. There was little tracking, so there was not enough paperwork or like somebody tracking. Here's what it was created. Then this is the milestone. This is what was created, and who is tracking was being developed. So I learned to have an actual program manager, somebody that will support the team and keep a tab on Excel sheet, whatever format you want, with the inventions or with the developments, and where is it coming from? What's the field? What's the field of use? How is this used? In which is it the semiconductor, the bio stuff, or is it the registry taxonomy? And so simple knowledge. It took me 10 years to convince people to, like, we need to do this, and we need to have somebody looking at it if we really want to get the ROI from these investments. And once that shifted, it was a lot more beneficial both for the academia, because they saw the same problem for them. They couldn't keep track. So that was one of my lessons in this, in any model, whether you have a model where it is shared intellectual property, is one owns part, the other one's or the other, it is publishing, no, we're going to publish everything. It depends on the model. It is important to try to actually know what's being created. So I think that was a lesson for me. So I don't know, reactions to this has to do with technology research transfer, pain points. That was one of my pain points. I don't know, like, you guys want to comment?
I have lots of comments, but I don't want to jump in.
Okay.
You sure? Okay. So yes, one of the pain points certainly was, like, there's a lot of excitement around the agreement construction and the kickoff, and then things just settle down, and there was a tracking issue and things of this type. Typically, what is valuable is, depending on where the funding is coming from, there's normally a moment when the funding, there is some kind of monetary transfer, and those normally are the moments when you need to check, is this agreement still working? And to just double check the buy-in. And there has to be the possibility that an agreement, stops because it's no longer servicing the needs of the parties. And it just essentially just has to be given more focus. I mean, I think Andrea once mentioned to me about, finance is your partner in this. If there really is a fiscal element to this, then there has to be, guardrails around, is this still functioning, and what due diligence happens as the project executes. So yes, there has to be reviews from all the various parties. The other one that really was interesting to watch is the IP side of things. Having an IP lawyer team who is a partnership throughout, keeping tabs, because exactly as Andrea was saying, once the teams execute, once the technologists, the industrial folks, and the academics get together, the work can evolve in lots of countless directions, but who's keeping an eye both on the value and the IP side of things and keeping their ear to the ground. So it's definitely a PM aspect. I suppose the other one is definitely an education that has to happen of the technologists, about IP. The IP agreement isn't signed and then forgotten. It has to be enacted. And so there has to be education and recurring education as the thing unfolds. So I think the PM piece really helps that. But that PM aspect must include fiscal, IP, and impact.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I agree. Okay. Anybody else? Let's see. Anybody else? What you guys thinking? There are more questions. Okay, let's see. Questions associated with this particular line of thought. Well, they're talking about adaptability. I think this is the last point when we're talking about disruption and balance. Let's just, Chris, I'm going to hold on to your question. Great question. We're going to talk about that in the disruption and changes and how do we address those. Okay, well, they're talking, so there's a question about AI tools. Okay, pause. There's a question about the use of when you are making the case for research. There's also another line of thought as to what is not to advocate for research inside the company. So we're talking research, yes, assuming that's the right way to go. But when is it's not appropriate to pursue research collaborations with others? I guess that's the question, right? Let me just make sure who is asking the question.
I think that's Joe Fish. And I think it's not just collaboration with others, but also just within an organization. And it actually is not unrelated to Chris's question also, in that the research that a company does is driven towards meeting its customer needs, and companies should be working towards long-term disruption, but research, sort of true creativity driven blue sky research also is very important for society and needs to happen. And I talked earlier about the flexibility within an organization, between sort of different models of research and different types of impact. But I think that is also important for us to think at as a societal level as well.
Anybody else reacting to what not to pursue? I mean, Claire, I'm thinking some of the models, like with experience at Intel, there was a committee, there was a system at Intel where you have so many blue sky opportunities, so many different areas in semicon and software. You have all these things that you could research. Intel used to call it long-term strategic
Research plans.
slurp. Yeah. So
Right.
there was a committee of fellows. Claire was one of them. Technical fellows that will look at the company, will present all these ideas, I believe once a year, and there will be a very set of technical fellows saying, yeah, this is in alignment with the stuff we need to be looking at in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Really important topic, or not so much for now. Let's pause it and wait. So Claire, you were in the process. I am just participant.
Right.
At some point I participated, but I wasn't in the whole process vetting system. Maybe you can talk about this.
I think Intel still has a typical process in conjunction with short to midterm innovation. Ideas were collected that would create products relatively fast based on existing premises. They were evaluated by the fellows on a committee, and then some of them were selected to be implemented. under the guidance of the executive members of Intel's leadership. A lot of Intel products, such as vPro, were created through this process. There was another process associated with Blue Sky research that again was typical for similar companies. That is probably much more difficult to standardize, to make the process in a box, just because something that appears blue sky today, in today's computing environment, could become an already commercialized area in under 18 months. So generally selecting something that is blue sky long term, B is feasible, and D is going to be useful for the company is considerably more complicated than this short-term process that Intel had in creating innovative products essentially in the existing computing environments. Other companies that I'm familiar with have similar processes to initiate innovation in products that is short-term. I think it is very useful. It speaks to the key endeavors that both Jamie and Theo talked about, helping the company move forward with continuous improvement. I think it's important to preserve those processes at all times.
It does. You know what I noticed, you guys? We've run out of time. I thought we had another half hour. This is like so fun. So I want to say, to all of you that asked the questions, thank you so much. We wanted to maybe, as we part, you guys, maybe one word, Jamie, Claire, Theo, about how do you manage this changes? The environment is changing, a bit disrupted at the moment. How do you create some balance? How do you manage? And then each of you a word, and then with that, you guys, we're gonna wrap up and let you go on with your day today.
So yeah, so in terms of balance and disruption, I think it's essentially what will happen is an improved comms, basically. You need to have the footfall and communication between your product teams and your industrial labs, and a changing of metrics, including the industrial and academic metrics. That's evolving and it needs to be given some focus.
Fabulous. Jamie?
My one word is probably science. I actually think science is how you deal with ambiguity. And so that is why we're seeing it closer to product now too.
Thank you, Jamie. Claire?
Right. I think those are outstanding points. Science is certainly about uncertainty. If you knew the result every time, it wouldn't be science. So in a way, uncertainty is already baked into the scientific enterprise. On the other hand, especially those projects that require equipment, projects that require a lot of investment that cannot be borne by the companies themselves in many instances. These projects are very promising, but they are also more vulnerable to the periods of uncertainty. So I think the scientific endeavor survived the previous periods of uncertainty, or focus on things that were not justified, and I think it will survive this one as well.
Thank you, Claire. Davesh, that's all for now for us. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful, online discussion. And we look forward to continuing this conversation, offline as well. So thank you again.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
so
much.
So
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you so much.